16 years of marriage, stability, vacations, a career I loved. What more could anyone want? Apparently, for her, it wasn't enough. She needed an affair. So I decided, if she's going to play games, we're both playing. And my revenge? Let's just say she never saw it coming. I have always prided myself on structure, on order. That's what makes me a good architect. Every beam, every joint, every line. Precision is my life. It's safe, predictable. My wife, Valeria, however, is chaos incarnate. She owns a gallery where the so-called art is more about statements than skill. A splash of paint here, a brush stroke there, and suddenly you're avant-garde. But that was part of her charm, the spontaneity, the boldness. It balanced out my calculated nature. 16 years of marriage. That's what we had. 16 years of falling into routines that felt safe. She had her gallery, her shows, her late nights at events. I had my home office, my blueprints, and our morning jogs. It worked. At least, I thought it did. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. I remember because my buddy Mike called me right in the middle of revising the structural design for a new project. Mike's not the kind of guy to joke around, not when it comes to personal matters. "Hey," he said, his tone casual but carrying something heavier beneath it. "What's up with Valeria these days? She's out at lunch, yeah? Saw her at that new bistro downtown with some guy." I chuckled, brushing it off. "Must be work. You know how she is? Always networking." "Yeah." Mike hesitated. "Didn't look like networking, though." His words sat with me like a bad aftertaste. I tried to laugh it off, but the seed was planted. That night, over dinner, I asked her about her day. She mentioned a productive meeting with a new gallery investor. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, but something in the way she dismissed it so easily gnawed at me. It felt rehearsed. I'm not a paranoid man. I've built a life on logic, on facts, but I also know that structures, no matter how sturdy, can hide their flaws beneath the surface. Maybe this was one of those times. The next incident came, a week later. I had decided to surprise her during lunch, partly because I wanted to see her, but mostly because that doubt from Mike's call wouldn't let me rest. I walked into her usual cafe with a craving for a good coffee and a croissant, only she wasn't there. I texted her, nothing, called her, straight to voicemail. It wasn't until I stepped back onto the street, frustrated and ready to head back to work, that I saw her. Across the street, sitting at an outdoor table with him. I couldn't see his face, but his posture was casual, leaning slightly forward toward her. And she laughed in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not the polite chuckle she gave at gallery events, but the kind of laugh that softened her eyes. My stomach twisted. "Hey, Val!" I called out, striding toward them. She turned, startled, and for a fraction of a second her expression betrayed something. Panic? Guilt? But she quickly recovered, smiling as though nothing were out of the ordinary. "Hey, what are you doing? Here?" she asked, her voice light. But I could sense the tension beneath it. "Thought I'd surprise you for lunch," I said, looking pointedly at the man. "Mind introducing me?" "Oh, this is Eric. He's an artist. We're discussing a potential exhibit for the gallery." Eric nodded, offering a polite smile. His handshake was firm, his demeanor calm, but there was something in his eyes that felt off, like he wasn't intimidated by me at all. I played along, smiling and acting oblivious, but I couldn't shake the unease. That night, as she fell asleep, beside me, I stared at the ceiling. The image of them together burned into my mind. I couldn't let it go. AirTag. That's what it's called. A little device small enough to slip into her handbag without her noticing. It was supposed to be a harmless experiment, a way to confirm what I already knew. She was loyal. She'd never risk what we had, right? But then came the night that changed everything. It was late, around 9 p.m., and she wasn't home. She had texted earlier saying she'd be working late at the gallery, but the AirTag told a different story. She wasn't at the gallery. She was 300 meters away, in the parking lot of a boutique hotel. At first, I told myself it was nothing. A meeting? A mistake? But 9 p.m. at a hotel? My pulse raced as I drove there, my logical brain warring with the primal panic rising in my chest. The receptionist knew me, thanks to Valeria's gallery often using the venue for events. "Oh, your wife's here for a conference," she said brightly, unaware of how absurd that sounded. A conference? At this hour? I sat in the lobby, waiting, watching. And then she appeared. Hair disheveled, lipstick smudged, her blouse slightly untucked. She didn't even notice me as she hurried past, fumbling with her phone. "Valeria," I said, my voice low but firm. She froze. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw it again, that flicker of guilt. "I thought you were at the gallery," I continued, keeping my tone even despite the storm raging inside me. She stammered, There was a last-minute meeting here. I was just heading home." I didn't respond, didn't press further. I simply nodded and let her walk away. But something inside me broke that night. The cracks in our marriage were no longer hidden. They were glaring, impossible to ignore. After that night at the hotel, something shifted inside me. I'd always been a man of control, a master of my own life. I designed buildings, for God's sake, structures meant to last decades, centuries even. And yet, here I was, unable to hold together the one thing I thought would be unshakable: my marriage. For days, I played it cool. I didn't confront her directly about what I'd seen. Instead, I observed her, trying to piece together a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. Valeria had always been good at hiding things, masking her emotions behind her charisma. But now I could see the subtle tells, the way she avoided my gaze when we talked, the hesitation in her voice when I asked about her day, the sudden increase in late nights at work. I started checking the AirTag more frequently, tracking her movements like some kind of amateur detective, and the pattern was clear. She was meeting him, Eric, the artist, the man whose smug smile and easy confidence had grated on me from the moment I shook his hand. One evening, as I sat in my office pretending to work, my mind spiraled. Thoughts of her with him invaded every corner of my brain. What did he have that I didn't? Was it the artist thing? The spontaneity? Did she think I was boring? Predictable? My hands clenched into fists, and I stared down at the blueprint in front of me, realizing I'd been scribbling over it in frustration. By the time she came home that night, I'd calmed myself, though the tension still simmered beneath the surface. She walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, her perfume trailing behind her. I noticed the faint smudge of lipstick on her cheek. "How was work?" I asked casually, not looking up from my laptop. "Busy," she replied, her tone flat. "I'm exhausted." She didn't even kiss me goodnight. Instead, she went straight to the shower, locking the door behind her. The breaking point came a week later. It was another late night for her, another excuse about a gallery. Investor she needed to schmooze. I didn't bother asking questions anymore because I already knew where she was going. This time, I decided to follow her. I parked a block away from the hotel and waited. Sure enough, she arrived, wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, a deep, red number that clung to her curves in a way that made my stomach churn. She didn't hesitate as she walked inside, her heels clicking against the pavement, her phone in hand. I waited 15 minutes before I followed. Inside, I played it cool, walking past the receptionist with a nod and heading straight for the elevators. The AirTag told me which floor she was on, and as I stepped into the elevator, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced with possibilities. What was I even going to do when I saw her? Confront her? Scream at her? Beg for an explanation? When the elevator doors opened, I hesitated. The hallway stretched out before me, quiet and dimly lit. Her location was at the end of the corridor. My legs felt like lead as I walked toward the room. I stopped in front of the door. Room 417. I could hear muffled voices on the other side. Laughter. My stomach twisted as I imagined what was happening in there. My hand hovered over the door, trembling. Should I knock? Should I kick it down? Before I could decide, the door opened. It wasn't Valeria who opened it. It was Eric. He froze when he saw me, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition, then to something I could only describe as smugness. "Hey," he said, leaning casually against the door frame. "You lost or something?" I ignored him, my eyes darting past him into the room. Valeria stood by the bed, her dress slightly askew, her hair a mess. She looked at me, her face a mix of shock and something else. Guilt? Fear? "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Eric smirked. "I think you know exactly what this is." "Shut up!" I snapped, stepping closer. "Valeria, what's going on?" She stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but nothing she said mattered. The truth was right there, staring me in the face. "It's not what it looks like," she finally said, her voice trembling. "Really?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because it looks like my wife is playing not baby games with some guy in a hotel room." Eric laughed, a low, mocking sound that made my blood boil. "Look, man, maybe you should leave. Clearly this is a private matter." My fist connected with his face before I even realized what I was doing. He stumbled back, clutching his nose as blood trickled down his hand. "Stop it!" Valeria screamed, stepping between us. "Are you insane?" "No," I said, my voice cold. "I'm just done." I turned and walked out, my hands shaking, my chest heaving. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. That night I didn't go home. I couldn't. Instead, I drove aimlessly, the weight of what I'd just seen pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness. 16 years, 16 goddamn years, and this is how it ends? Eventually, I found myself parked outside a bar. I went in, ordered a drink, and sat in silence, replaying the events of the night over and over in my head. That's when the idea hit me. If she could betray me like this, humiliate me like this, why should I hold myself to some moral high ground? There was someone in her gallery who had always caught my eye, a photographer named Emily. She was younger, sweet, and undeniably beautiful. Valeria had always been oddly dismissive of her, brushing her off as too inexperienced and unprofessional. Maybe she saw something I didn't at the time. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found her name. My finger hovered over the call button for a moment before I pressed it. "Hello?" she answered, her voice soft and curious. "Emily, hey, it's me, Alex," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was wondering if you're free to grab a drink sometime. I could use some company." She hesitated for a moment before replying. "Yeah, sure. When?" "How about tonight?" "When?" Emily had asked, her tone light but curious, as if she wasn't quite sure why I, Valeria's husband, was calling her out of the blue. "Tonight," I said without hesitation, my voice steady even though my pulse was racing. "I need to get out of my own head for a bit, and you seem like someone who'd understand. Valeria's always spoken highly of you." That last part was a lie. Valeria never had a single nice thing to say about Emily. But it didn't matter. Emily didn't need to know that. There was a pause on the line, and for a moment I thought she'd say no. But then she replied, "All right. Sure. Where should we meet?" I gave her the name of a nearby upscale bar, one I knew Valeria hated because she claimed the lighting was too tacky. "Perfect. I'll see you in an hour," I said before, hanging up. As I drove to the bar, I couldn't ignore the whirlwind of emotions churning inside me. Was this the right thing to do? Was I sinking to Valeria's level? But then I thought of her disheveled hair, the lipstick smudged on her cheek, Eric's smug face in that hotel room. My jaw tightened, and the doubt dissolved. This wasn't about being right or wrong. This was about reclaiming a piece of myself, proving that I wasn't some fool to be pitied. Emily was already waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner booth with a glass of wine in front of her. She looked different outside of the gallery, less formal, more relaxed. Her dark hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and she wore a simple black dress that highlighted her delicate features. "Alex," she said, smiling as I approached. "This is unexpected." I slid into the booth across from her, signaling the waiter to bring me a drink. "Yeah, it's been one of those days," I said, forcing a chuckle. Emily tilted her head, studying me. "You don't seem like the type to just grab a drink. What's going on?" I hesitated, debating how much to tell her. But then I remembered the look on Valeria's face when she'd been caught, the way she'd tried to lie even as the evidence stared her in the face. "Screw it. It's Valeria," I said, leaning back in my seat. "She's been distant lately. I caught her tonight. With someone else." Emily's eyes widened. "Oh my God. Alex, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said, the bitterness creeping into my voice. "She made her choice, and honestly, I should have seen it coming. She's been pulling away for months, always at the gallery, always working late." Emily reached across the table, placing a hand on mine. It was a small gesture, but it caught me off guard. "You don't deserve that," she said softly. "You're a good guy, Alex. Anyone can see that." Her words hit me harder than I expected. When was the last time someone had said that to me? Meant it? We talked for hours after that. At first, it was about Valeria and the affair, but as the night went on, the conversation shifted. Emily told me about her struggles at the gallery, how she always felt like Valeria dismissed her ideas. I told her about my work, my dreams of designing a landmark building that would stand for generations. Somewhere between the second and third round of drinks, the atmosphere between us changed. The air grew heavier, charged with something unspoken. I caught her staring at me, her lips parting slightly as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "For what?" "For talking about myself so much. You're the one going through a lot right now." I shook my head. "Honestly, it's been a relief. For the first time in weeks, I feel like I can actually breathe." She smiled, her cheeks flushing slightly, and for the first time that night, I let myself forget. Forget about Valeria. Forget about Eric. Forget about the shattered remains of my marriage. We left the bar together. I don't even remember whose idea it was. One minute, we were laughing, standing outside in the cool night air, and the next, we were in my car, the tension between us crackling like a live wire. "Do you want to go somewhere?" Emily asked, her voice hesitant but laced with hope. Didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I do. The hotel I chose wasn't the same one Valeria had taken Eric to. That would have been too poetic, too on the nose. Instead, I drove to a smaller place on the edge of town, one I knew would be quiet and discreet." Emily followed me into the room, her hand slipping into mine as the door clicked shut behind us. For a moment, we just stood there, the weight of what we were about to do hanging heavy in the air. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I leaned in, my lips capturing hers in a kiss that was equal parts desperation and hunger. She didn't pull away. The rest of the night passed in a blur of tangled sheets and stolen breaths. For a few hours, I let myself forget everything. Valeria, the betrayal, the years of feeling like I wasn't enough. The next morning, reality came crashing back. I woke up to find Emily curled up beside me, her breathing soft and steady. For a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. Not because of Valeria, she didn't deserve my loyalty anymore, but because Emily was innocent in all of this. She didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of my anger and hurt. I slipped out of bed quietly, grabbing my clothes and heading to the bathroom. As I splashed cold water on my face, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. Who was I becoming? When I walked back into the room, Emily was awake, sitting up in bed with the sheets wrapped around her. "Morning," she said, her voice soft. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. She hesitated, biting her lip. "So, what happens now?" That was the question, wasn't it? What happens now? I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor as Emily's question lingered in the air. What happens now? What happens now? I had no idea. Last night had been about escape, about seizing back some semblance of control after watching my life crumble in real time. But now, in the cold light of day, the weight of my choices settled on my chest like a boulder. Emily shifted behind me, and I felt her hand brush against my shoulder. "Alex," she said softly, "are you okay?" I turned to her, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Yeah, I need to figure some things out." Her brow furrowed, concern etched across her face. "About Valeria?" The sound of her name felt like nails on a chalkboard. "I don't know if there's anything left to figure out with her," I said bitterly. Emily hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip like she was trying to decide whether or not to say something. Finally, she spoke. "I don't want to make things worse for you." "Last night was exactly what I needed," I interrupted, my voice firmer than I intended. "You don't need to apologize for anything. If anyone's at fault here, it's me." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Well," she said finally, "if you ever need to talk, I'm here." I nodded, standing up and grabbing my jacket. "Thank you, Emily, really. But I should go." Driving home felt surreal, like I was caught between two lives that didn't quite belong to me. On one hand, there was the life I'd shared with Valeria, the house, the routines, the traditions we'd built over 16 years. And then there was last night, a fleeting moment of passion that felt more real than anything I'd experienced in years. When I walked through the front door, the smell of freshly brewed coffee hit me. Valeria was in the kitchen, humming softly, to herself as she poured a cup. For a brief moment, it felt like nothing had changed, like we were still the couple we used to be before everything fell apart. But then she turned and saw me, and the tension returned. "Where were you last night?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "Out," I replied curtly, walking past her to grab a glass of water. "Out where?" "Does it matter?" I snapped, setting the glass down a little too hard on the counter. Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I turned to her, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and hurt. "It means I'm done pretending, Valeria. I'm done pretending that this marriage isn't falling apart, that you haven't been sneaking around behind my back with Eric." Her face paled, and for a moment she looked like she might deny it. But then she straightened her shoulders, her expression hardening. "So that's what this is about," she said coolly. "Don't act like you're the victim here," I shot back. "I saw you, at the hotel, with him. You didn't even try to hide it." She didn't say anything, her silence louder than any words could have been. "You ruined us, Valeria," I continued, my voice breaking. 16 years and you threw it all away for... what? Some fling with an artist who probably can't even afford to pay his own rent? "That's rich, coming from you," she said, her tone venomous now. "You think you're so perfect." "Alex? So above it all? You don't even see how you've been pushing me away for years. Always working, always locked in your office. You don't care about me. You care about your damn blueprints." "That's not true," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if she was right. "Isn't it?" she shot back, stepping closer. "You checked out of this marriage long before I did. At least I found someone who actually listens to me, who makes me feel wanted." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see how much they hurt. "And what does that make you? A victim? Or just a cheater who doesn't have the guts to admit she's wrong?" Her jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought she might slap me. But instead she turned and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. The days that followed were a blur of tension and avoidance. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was cold and clipped. I spent most of my time at work or out of the house, finding any excuse to avoid being around her. I saw Emily a few more times, though I made sure to keep things discreet. She was a welcome distraction, a reminder that there was life beyond the wreckage of my marriage. But every time I left her, I couldn't shake the guilt that clung to me like a second skin. And then, one evening, Valeria dropped the bombshell. "I want a divorce," she said, her voice calm but firm. I looked up from my laptop, her words sinking in like a lead weight. "What?" "You heard me," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "This isn't working anymore, Alex. We're toxic, and I think we both know it's time to let go." I wanted to argue, to tell her that we could fix this if we just tried. But deep down, I knew she was right. The cracks in our marriage weren't just surface level, they were foundational. "Fine," I said finally, my voice hollow. "If that's what you want." "It's not just what I want," she replied. "It's what we need. For both of us." The divorce was messy, as divorces usually are. We fought over the house, the savings, even the dog. But in the end, we came to an agreement that left us both feeling like we'd lost. I moved into a small apartment downtown, far from the suburban life we'd built together. It was strange, starting over after so many years. But there was also a sense of freedom in it, a chance to rebuild, to find myself again. Emily and I drifted apart not long after the divorce was finalized. She was kind about it, understanding even, but I could tell she didn't want to be a constant reminder of my past. And maybe that was for the best. As for Valeria, I heard through mutual friends that she and Eric didn't last long. Apparently, their whirlwind romance fizzled out once the reality of real life set in. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part just felt sad. Looking back, I realize now that our marriage wasn't destroyed by one affair or one argument. It was death by 1,000 cuts, years of neglect, resentment, and unspoken frustrations. But life goes on, and so did I. Months passed, and life slowly began to settle. The divorce, though painful, had been a turning point. My small apartment became a sanctuary, a place to rediscover who I was without Valeria. I threw myself into my work, taking on projects I'd always dreamed of. It was lonely at times, but there was peace in the solitude. One day, I ran into Valeria at a coffee shop. She looked different, less polished, more real. We exchanged polite words, and for the first time, I felt no anger, just the faint ache of what we'd lost. She mentioned Eric was long gone, and I nodded, offering no judgment. As I walked away, I felt lighter, freer. My past no longer defined me. Emily had been a chapter, brief but meaningful, and I was grateful for her. But this journey was mine, alone. Standing on the site of my latest project, watching as the foundation was laid, I realized something. Life, like architecture, is about rebuilding, and this time, I'd build it stronger.